Good morning, everyone. This is Art Skills with Jeff Gottlieb. I have a guest with me today. And for those of you who haven't tuned in before, this show has been about kind of the three interlocking topics of permaculture, primitive living skills, and nature study. And that's kind of how I spend all my time. So the guests that I've brought on have all had interesting perspective on those things, and sometimes they might be in areas that you wouldn't think right off would be related to those subjects. And my guest today is Dr. Graeme Potter, who is a person of interest in the Dillsborough and Silva area, not to the police, to the public. And she runs a wellness clinic here in Dillsborough, and has some really interesting ideas for projects and things that she's planning to do with her practice and her land, and to better serve community and patients and things like that. And I've been lucky enough to listen to her ideas about the planning process and what kinds of things she wants to work on, and I get to go over there and move large logs around every now and then just for fun. So so that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the intersection between the concept of wellness and our kind of major topics for the show. So first, I would love it if you just define for people what are we talking about? What's the definition of the word wellness? What is that, and why are we paying attention to it?
That is a good question, because it's defined in multiple different ways by different people too. So it's not just one definition necessarily, but it's the expectation. It's a little broader. So some people will say lack of chronic disease, that I don't have diabetes, or I don't have blood pressure, or I'm not at risk for a heart attack. And then some people will go a little bit further and say that they have personal identifiers for what wellness is for them. Lack of pain, lack of chronic disease, ability to do X, Y, or Z when I'm this age, not having Alzheimer's, for example, or not having other things. So there is no one definition, like in the medical field, certainly no one definition for wellness.
Oh.
It's a very broad kind of term that we can then apply either at a public health or population health level, and then we can bring it in and apply it to an individual. But the way I think of it when I'm talking to people, and why we have wellness in our name, is just because we're trying to achieve that individual space of objectives for people. So somebody may not want to necessarily be chronic disease free, but they just want to improve their control on a chronic disease. And that might be wellness for them. And maybe at some other point then they morph into, now I want to be disease free.
Wow. That's surprising. I thought there was kind of an overarching textbook definition that, and I thought, when I think of the word wellness, I think of, it's a cut above just managing a condition you have, and it's paying attention to all of the things that affect your well-being, of all that word well. Am I mentally well? Am I happy? Am I this, that, the other thing? That, I think of all of those things fitting into
quality of life.
Quality of life. Okay, that's
exactly. So it's taking like a lack of chronic disease definition and adding quality of life on top of that, and that becomes very individual for different people.
Okay. I guess I've heard it expressed that wellness is not just the absence of disease, but the presence of your systems functioning as well as you can help them to do.
Yeah, that's how we think of it, as optimization, instead of just, okay, you're not, so take somebody with blood pressure and it's not that you're just taking them off a medication potentially, or giving them the tools to make that blood pressure better, but that blood pressure is never in a vacuum. So it's always affected by where their brain is, and what their stress level is, and what their weight is, and how much exercise they do. So you can't ever just take one even chronic disease and take it out of and put it in a vacuum by itself. You know, there are always too many factors going on, and those are what brings in the optimal health there, is because if you optimize your stress level, then your blood pressure will improve. So there's an element of what we call restorative medicine as well, is that we're taking a lot of people that don't know how to be healthy, and we're restoring them to one point, and then you take the restored person, and then you optimize them.
Okay, so maybe it would be good to come up with a list of maybe things that aren't generally considered the medical sphere, or at least by some kind of entities, but that we think can really affect your wellness. So you said, you say stress? Was that one of your markers?
So many people will underestimate the physical and mental effect of stress. Stress causes cognitive impairment. Stress causes physical impairments that then lead to potential for heart attack or potential for stroke just from the blood pressure effects. But then also a lot of the effects on the gut loses our normal gut health. So then that affects your brain neurotransmitters. And then so if your gut's not functioning normally, your bacteria don't make the proper neurotransmitters. So then your brain doesn't function normally. So then you get depressed and anxious. And it becomes like this vicious cycle of unhealth, which most of us are living in if we have a 40-hour, work week or more, and then we've got all these other expectations of what society puts on us, and then there are kids to take care of, or family members that are sick, or whatever. So stress is huge. And I think there's also that aspect of we've lost a little bit of community, and so the support is not there in terms of we've got a lot of nuclear families or single parents that are trying to make it with their kids. That puts a whole element because there's not enough support there. So there's the community and spiritual aspect of wellness that's very, very important. And when you're just talking about Western medicine, that tends to isolate a disease state, thyroid, blood pressure, high cholesterol, and it doesn't take into account all this other stuff.
Well, isn't that kind of the scientific method? You can't come to a conclusion or prove a thing if you don't isolate the variables in your experiment. But when it comes to a complicated living organism with stuff happening to it inside and outside, how do you isolate a variable?
You can't. We have this. There's a PhD. I think he's PhD, Dale Bredesen, who writes a lot on Alzheimer's, and so he does a lot of research, and he came up with this whole sort of multimodal protocol for how to improve people's lives that have Alzheimer's, or reverse, or fix it. They couldn't get funding for it because it had too many things, and so part of it was he had to take a step back, because really in medicine you just can't test one thing, because it's unrealistic to say this one blood pressure medication affects this person in this way. So we have done all those studies, or not enough, but we've done those studies, but they leave such a vacuum of other stuff that hasn't been looked at, that they really have to go back and redo how they do scientific testing now to take into account multiple parameters, and especially when we're doing wellness stuff, how do you test those protocols? Yeah. So absolutely. Yeah, so we went to the space of, we discovered germs, we did testing, we discovered scientific theory, we worked with that for a while. You get to this place with it, and then you figure out that scientific theory doesn't, testing that is a very hard thing to do on the human body.
So you think we're in a new era of how to think and how to ask the questions and how to evaluate the answers and that sort of thing? Are we looking differently and thinking differently and asking differently than we used to?
I hope so. But I don't think most of Western medicine has caught up with, it's still much easier for them to assess one problem and give one solution for it, and then incidentally mention, but you might do better in terms of your diet and exercise, but here's a prescription in the meanwhile. And so I don't think that a lot of Western medicine has gone, because they don't have the tools and the resources, and because it's a very individualized. Everything that we do is very individualized.
I imagine.
And then you come down to, but we have to eat well.
Yeah, that was one of the realms I hope you mentioned at that point, and that is, what are we eating? Because how you're eating is going to affect your immune system and your neurotransmitters and your digestion and your gut flora and everything like that, and then we get into what you're eating. Well, where did it come from, and who raised it, and under what conditions, and what chemicals are they using, and do those affect human health, and all that kind of stuff. I love this. This opens up the biggest can of worms. You never get to the end of it. It's great. Okay, so let's give the conversation a little direction then, because the show is about primitive skills and nature study and permaculture. Can you tell us some more about what your practice is planning for this interesting piece of land you acquired in the last few years, and how are you going to use that towards the goal of wellness for patient and community and such?
Yeah,
in those three areas, pick your favorite area and let's start there.
Totally a work in progress.
Yeah.
As you know.
Yeah.
But part of it is, so when I started doing this, I confidently went out and said, but I can educate people, and I have a background in nutrition, so I'm fine. I can just educate people and get them to do the right stuff. But it's not that easy, because the underlying behavior changes that you have to institute almost come from how do you do that. And when I'm sitting in an office across from somebody going, you really should do this, they all go, yes. But the tools to do it are not necessarily as easy as saying, yes, I should really do that. So when I say to somebody, really 100 years ago, we were doing well to milk the cow for 2 hours because that just calmed everybody's brains and we were all happy and peaceful and quiet. Not everybody, but it made your brain happy and peaceful and quiet. And we didn't have internet input, and we didn't have this constant, you have to run from this to this to this to this all day. So, so that kept us with a quieter brain. Well, that's not possible to do with most people's lifestyles these days.
You can't just prescribe a cow for each person?
Totally do. Yeah. And they totally look at me and go, yes. I'll get right on that. Yeah. So when I started doing this, I sort of simplistically assumed I would tell them, the good foods to do, and they do the foods and everything would change, and tell them what exercises were good. And, so I did all that research, and then I started figuring out that just telling them to go to the grocery store and get good quality food, like the nutritionists are trained, just, tell people to go on the outside of the grocery store, because that's where all your vegetables and your fruits and your less processed stuff is, right? Good rule of thumb. But then you look at that and you go, but this organic product versus this non-organic product, now which do I do? Which has been sprayed more, which hasn't been sprayed more? Do I need it to be sprayed? It's an avocado. Do I care if it's been sprayed? And then you go deeper, where did this come from? And then we know that these are still, all the organic foods are grown on massive farms, which have all been depleted of nutrients.
3,000 miles from here.
Right. So then you have that transport of you're picking your raw vegetables, and then you're transporting, not raw, but immature vegetables, and transporting them so they'll be mature when you get there, and all that kind of stuff. So it's still not enough to tell people to go to the grocery store and pick good organic food off the shelf, And then how do you define clean food or anything like that? And then you get into your meats, and that same issue comes up. And then you go to, so I kept going deeper, right? So then every time I turned over a new leaf and go, oh, I know what to do, I just need to tell them to do this, there'd be another layer. So
another
that's
layer of resistance, but that means I would have to change how I think and what I know and what my family does when we all get together. And wait a minute, we've always done this,
yes.
that, and the other.
So
it's
in part changing them, but it's also in part that every time I turned over a new space, I would find that I had to go deeper. And I had to get back to these. So I'm saying, well, here I am feeding my kids this food, and I thought it was great food, and now I'm figuring out that the nutrient quantity is 50% what it was in the 50s, and we don't know where we're making these, and they still spray pesticides. They're just organically approved pesticides, And so I went deeper with it. And so, when I started doing this, essentially it was just all about me, and I wanted to have a good wellness space for myself. I wanted to figure out what I needed to do to get out of my high stress space and to raise my kids well and to have a good quality of life. It just totally wasn't about anybody else. But, as you go into it, but that's why I keep going deeper and deeper. So then we acquired this property. Intentionally, I was looking for a space to put my office on that would be my own space instead of a rental space anyway. But in addition, we lucked out to get 40 acres of property behind it, and that had the potential to create a space that I could not only do my own food, but then demonstrate how that food could work for other people and get people healthier food, and then grow a community of people who are creating healthy food, not just in our space, but in multiple spaces all over as far as we wanted to go. So local becomes so important. Local and knowing who's growing it becomes so important. And then be able to have a conversation. You know what? People can't do all of that stuff all day long. I mean, so for example, if I'm working, so you go back to your time budget, I'm working 40 hours a week,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm raising my kids, and I have to grocery shop, and I have an hour a week to grocery shop, and then how much time do you have to research all the components of what I'm buying in the grocery store? And you just run out of time, which then becomes another stressor,
Yeah.
So being able to create a local product, I think, is really important because people can see, and you can do a little bit of education at the same time. Why is it important that this food is coming from here? Well, we're getting these trace minerals up because we've intentionally changed the earth in this way. So that's where permaculture becomes super important in terms of having a way to build a good, healthy space in which to grow food. And then being able to teach people and demonstrate in a very gentle and easy way for them to acquire the knowledge.
Okay. Yeah, and I've been in on the planning, and for me, the permaculture is all about thinking ahead and designing the whole system. So it's not just about, well, I'm going to put this here to grow food. There are tons of people that are growing food that never heard the word permaculture, and they don't do anything that way. So I see it as being kind of an overarching design sense about it, and it includes your practice, and it includes the economics of your practice, where, what you say to a patient and whether it helps them is one part of what you do, and getting the bills paid and paying for the land and paying the people that work for you and stuff is part of the whole design too.
Yeah.
It's nuts and bolts. It's I had a literature professor that described that the writing that you should do is kind of like watching a swan glide across the water, and it's all beautiful, and you don't see the black, ugly, rubbery feet underneath the water that are making the swan go. But it has those, and it has to have those, otherwise it wouldn't go anywhere. So the swan's black, rubbery feet are this image that keeps saying, oh, well, how does this do what it's doing, and what made it do it? So that fits into my thoughts about permaculture, that it's that kind of, paying some attention to that man behind the curtain that's pulling the levers and making it all happen. Yeah, we have to think about what we want to do and how we're going to get there before we put things into place and spend money on it and do labor and then try and get a result. So you've got 40 acres. Mm-hmm. And what are you going to do with it all? So you were talking about growing food, but I haven't seen too many places in your plans and on the land itself where anything's ready to grow any food, except possibly meat.
Right,
Yeah.
Well, and even that, the pasture is not ready. So the biggest part of it, as you pointed out with permaculture and with any of these good design things, is a long-term design and looking and observing first. Yeah. And then the second part of it is that we have to have infrastructure development that we don't, when I got to it, the pasture had not been touched in probably 20 years. It ran cattle before that. And that's really all we know about what used to be on that space. There's an old barn, there wasn't really anything else. So we've got to create all that infrastructure before we actually have spaces to do stuff. But part of it is demonstrating for people that even a 4x4 space can produce, because this is what people come to me every day. I can't grow my own food. There's no way. I don't have that kind of time, you know? And I go, I know. But if I could say, I know, and then lead them out back and show them a 4x4 spot that's got this much and this much and this much on it, then I am starting to accomplish my goal. So it doesn't have to be, like, part of it is not overwhelming people with this huge finished plan or something like that. But, you know, a lot of my patients have been with me in the 10 years that I've been here, and so it's fun for them. Every time they come, there's something else that's been developed, or that's going on, or that's starting to happen, and they're like, wow, okay, so you're doing this now. And I'm like, yes, because I have time for it.
Uh-huh.
How's your time going? You know, it
laughing on the
segues.
inside.
It segues onto that conversation of how's your stress level, you know.
Yeah.
But they can also watch what I've done in terms of reducing my stress level, and then when I make a 4x4 plot with vegetables in it, I can be like, look, this is what I did this year, but it took me 7 years before I could do this.
Sure. Yeah, so people, they aren't seeing the final product yet because you're in the early part of the process.
And because it's my transition too, right? It's how do I get good healthy food? Well, this year...
What, you mean this is
and
all
the
about
year
your
before-
own wellness?
Again.
Wow.
But like this year, the previous years, what did I do? So I transitioned from trying to get stuff at Ingles or at the grocery store, and I started transitioning to get stuff at the farmer's market, where I could have a conversation about how did you make this pig? How did you make this kale? You know, did you spray it? Do you have this? Do you have that? You can sort of have that conversation with local people in a local space. So that's my intermediate transitionary thing. So yeah, okay. And even if I make my own thing in a 4x4, then you still have to talk about preservation and canning, right? So fine, I'll make my stuff in a 4x4, and then it'll be fall and winter, and I'll be sitting there going, I've got no kale, you know. So then I go back to the farmer's market. So it's just such a process that everybody has to walk through their own path. If they can watch it, or if they can see it happen in our space, then that'll still be an example for, you know.
Yeah, I see that it has great value as a showplace.
Yes,
people can say,
exactly.
oh, there's an idea I could see it being done. And
there's a little
'cause if
small
you tell
hen
me
house.
about
I
it-
can do 5
Right.
hens. I can do 6 hens in a
Right.
small hen house in this much space. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, if you tell somebody, you should do this, they walk away going, I don't know how. But if they see a thing and it's done, they look at it and they go, I could do that.
Exactly.
My big one with food growing, if somebody says to me, I can't grow any food, one word, buckets.
Yes.
You know, if you put a cherry tomato plant in a 5-gallon bucket full of good soil, you almost can't help but grow loads of tomatoes. It's perfect.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
and it's easy. And if you put it there and you decide that's not the right spot, pick the bucket up, put it somewhere else. It's great. You can put it inside in the winter and get the last batch of tomatoes out of it. Yeah, so I love the idea of the showplace, because you've got people that are coming for one thing, and you could sneakily introduce them to something they didn't think of.
Right.
Yeah, they didn't have to even come to talk about diet or growing their own food. It's just that when they park and they walk in, and there's
They'll
cherry
get all of
tomatoes
this-
and
exactly.
containers and 4x4, and they'll go home going, I saw a good idea at the doctor's office today.
Yeah.
I like it. Yeah, I see permaculture as like all over this stuff. It's all over how we should take care of our own health, how we should take care of our community health, and how we should run businesses. I mean, let's go back to the 3 major kind of rules of permaculture. It has to serve people, it has to take care of the earth, and it has to return a surplus to the system. So you also mentioned a concept that's really important to me in lots of ways, and that is community. And and I totally got your point about having a support system and loads of people that you know, and buying from the farmer's market instead of a big impersonal store. And also something that Dr. Potter has been doing is collaborating with other people that are each doing their own thing on their own land. And we go over there and help this person build this chicken house. And we go over there and we help this person cut up logs and make fence posts out of them. And we go over there and we help me take care of my rabbits when I'm on a trip or something like that. Yeah, so that's been really, really valuable. And depending on and fun, and you're not out there like I have neighbors who have a lot of projects going on, and they work really, really hard on those projects, and they want to get together with neighbors, and they want to have people over, and they just don't have any time because they never collaborate, and they never ask for help, and they never lend any, and so they never see anybody because they're busy, and that's
and that's what I used to do. That was a learning point for me too, because
Sweet.
I didn't want to impose on people by asking for help. Right? So, so part of it is the giving first, and then the the reciprocity that's involved in creating that community is that assumption that, it'll be okay to ask for help because you're going to give it back some other time later. So you don't have to feel guilty about asking for help, because we're all raised to be, like nuclear family. You're raised to be inside this little bubble of this is my people and these are the people I can ask for help.
Right, and all those people are not.
Yeah, well, can I ask them for help? Is it appropriate?
I'd have to pay them or something.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Yeah, and I guess in thinking about how did you talk about it? Like, you don't want to just ask other people for help. You want to give it first. It doesn't matter which one you do first, as long as you're talking to your community and you're in there and you're.
Yeah, but I found it was easier for me to look at it that way. So once I started giving time, then I had a lot more. It took down my stress level, and I could go out and say, okay, I need 3 people for this project. That before it would have just been, me trying to figure out how to do this sort of by myself.
And I can imagine that if you have a community of people and they're collaborating on ideas and they're all getting together to do this and they're all getting together to do that, it's affecting their mental health because they're not alone and they're they've got people to talk to and they're having fun while they're getting things done, and they're things that are possible that weren't possible before, and I mean that's going to affect your stress level and your happiness and your mental health, and I mean just to have people.
Yes, so, but we've lost a little bit of that skill, so we have to teach people back why it's valuable to do things. And I think in this culture, it's also, you've got to look and see what people normally do. How do they get together? They go out and have dinner together or something like that, which is fun, and you'll have a conversation, but you won't necessarily, but maybe you'll feel guilty because you're taking time away to do stuff, or it's an expense or something else like that, whereas you could still have quality time working on a project instead of just randomly going out to dinner or something like that. But and in the old days that used to happen automatically. I feel
barn raising, the community
exactly
barn raising thing.
That kind of community expectation that we don't have because our community is too large.
Yeah, and there's also been, I think, real pressure from. I mean, if you have people that have to be self-reliant, and you have single-parent families, and you have tiny nuclear families but not community, then everybody has to buy all their own stuff.
Exactly.
And you sell more blenders and lawnmowers and whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
So maybe there's pressure put on us to isolate, and it's just less fun that way. So I don't think it takes much for people to be surprised at how much better they feel when they try a community sort of interaction with their neighbors. Go help your neighbor put up a new shed or whatever, You got a nice relationship with that neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it doesn't have to be a specific kind. That's what I'm seeing. I've got groups of neighbors that have this way they live and this thing they believe in, this whatever, and I have another group of neighbors that live differently and they do other things, and I'm a different sort of neighbor with those two different groups, but we get it done, and it's fun. Yeah, community thinking and discussing community is another gigantic subject, and we'll have to dig into that because that really fits. So we're talking about permaculture in connection to what you're doing. So how about nature study? I mean, you bought 40 acres of plants and animals, basically. Plants and animals and soil and rocks and water. How any thoughts on, being outside with living things, with health and wellness?
There's research data. So we can absolutely, there are different levels of research data, but there is research data to show that you will improve your mental health if you simply go out and do Shinrin-yoku, which is essentially forced bathing.
Oh, I was gonna throw that phrase out there. I'm glad you hit it. Yeah.
So just going out there and hanging out in the trees, whether you take your shoes off or not. And then there is actual scientific data to show that if your feet are in contact with the bare earth, you have changes in your red blood cell structure, to be in a more positive fashion. So it's fascinating to me that, all of this, and study is one thing, but it does involve observation and potentially just being quiet and spending a lot of time with nature. And then we know that is physically helpful, but then we take that step back and say, but you go back to your daily budget of I have to do this, this, and this. And time to go out and spend 2 hours watching thing X is not necessarily, there, but it should be. It should be part of what we're doing, and especially to teach the kids that skill of going outside and getting away from the video games. So a lot of this is the fact that even 2 generations ago, you talk to folks and they go, oh yeah, my granddad used to do blah, 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 and my dad does this. And all of these folks did this stuff. We're not that far removed from it. Yeah. And they have valuable information. And at the same time, we now, this generation, the 20-somethingers that don't even know how to cook a pot of vegetable soup, and the kids that don't even know how to open the door to go outside, it's getting like a little bit worse every generation. So on a physical level, nature study is very important just to physically get us outside and pull us in any direction of interest whatsoever. But that was one of the things that I thought was interesting with the permaculture too. And the primitives, you can pull all of this stuff together, because all of this creates a space. For example, when you're doing something in a primitive fashion, you're doing it more slowly sometimes, right? You're not using those electric or power tools as much. You get mindfulness out of it. You get that moment where you are sitting and not doing anything except a nice, repetitive, calm thing, and that is brain health.
Yeah. And it's tied into the practical, because if you don't pay really good attention and calm down, you're going to make a poor quality product, and it won't work well.
Yes.
So you get, it is all tied together in that way. Yeah, and I like the connection to the primitive skills, because just gathering materials means that you have to know a lot about the nature study. You have to know, I need thin willow twigs. Well, what kind of willow? And where do those like to grow? And so, and what time of year should we pick those? And what should we do with them when we pick them? So it's all glued together. So do you see using the property with your practice for people to connect with nature in a more planned way?
Planned in that it gives them access and it gives them something to do.
Oh, access. Okay.
So part of it is that I think people may want to get outside. People may want their children to get outside, but they don't know what to do. They just don't necessarily I would like to fish, but I didn't learn how to fish, and I'd like to get my kid to fish, but but somebody has to be there to sort of teach that skill or to help to do that skill
Okay.
or facilitate. So I think anything that we do on the property will have a learning element to it, and then for us it's a matter of how do we the unplanned portion of the program so far is how do you incorporate people intentionally into what we're doing, because I can offer workshops and I can encourage people to do X or Y or Z, but we just don't we don't have that formulated. How do we get the people on the land to do a nice lovely nature walk identifying thing X and then doing something with it?
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, I'm gonna spill the beans. Dr. Potter and I have been talking about offering children's workshops in kind of nature connection, primitive skills, just being outdoors all day. And we're going slow with the infrastructure, but as soon as we figure out, okay, where will we have it, and what do we do in case of rain, and how many bathrooms will there be, and that sort of thing. As soon as we get that stuff nailed down, we're going to be offering programs, and it's the kind of thing I've been doing for all of my career, and all I need in this world is a place to have it where it's wanted, and people are going to supply the infrastructure. I'm like, great, I will show up with my crates full of deer antlers and seeds and tools, and we're gonna make stuff, and we're gonna look at birds, and we're gonna that sort of stuff. So stay tuned. That's coming sometime. Maybe this summer if we can figure it out. Maybe not. Anyway, so we're working on it.
it's all about the infrastructure.
Yeah. Well, we're back to that.
Yep.
Well, that's the way
Yep.
permaculture is. It always circles right
Yes.
back around to all the important concepts, and get your infrastructure. Yeah. So I was wondering if there might be some things that you've learned that you would put out there to listeners of all stripes that might be food for thought. And I wrote down a couple of kind of different groups of people, but it sure isn't limited to that. What could physicians be thinking about that they're not thinking about, and how can we get them to think about it? How about educators? Everybody from school teachers to camp counselors to anybody that stands out there and says, "Okay, I've got this plan for this educational experience. What would I think about?" And then there are people that are practicing primitive skills, and maybe they're not educators yet. Or maybe we're all educators, and maybe we're all working on our own wellness, and maybe we're all, okay.
So
anything
I
you wanna
think
throw in there?
I think you've got it to some extent. When you look at the work that the folks that I have met that do the earth skills stuff, they've gone through a lot of their own work in terms of figuring out why they want to do something,
It's true.
and how it contributes to that overall model of care that we're talking about. That sort of that permaculture, does it hit the three basic rules kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? But I don't think they necessarily appreciate how profound what they do, how profoundly that can affect other people. Because when you live in your own space, it's sort of with a lot of other people who are already thinking the same way.
Yeah.
And then you walk out, it's like you go to a completely different place, and people look at you like, and then, you see this entire group of people who think completely differently. Just like recycling, the obviousness of recycling and the benefits of it do not need to be explained to somebody who is already in that earth skill space. But yet there's an entire group of people in the US that have absolutely no concept of the benefit of recycling. So even simple stuff like that, I think there's such a massive opportunity for daily education. But I think that the entire healthcare field, we just don't have enough time.
Don't have enough time. Okay, we'll come back for 6 or 7 more shows. And we'll dig that hole and see what's in it.
In a nutshell, it comes down to the comment you made about corporate and maybe not and isolating people so as to sell more product. It's very similar for how the medical field is being educated, and the expectations and the impossibility of talking to people about diet and exercise because they just won't listen anyway, you know? And so there's this, I think there's this moment that a lot of physicians have to break out of, but it's not just the physicians, it's the entire healthcare system. And it does amaze me when I come from my space again of having learned and discovered all this stuff, and then I go back and talk to somebody who is like regular Western medicine healthcare, and I'm like, oh yeah, I used to be there, but like I'm so far this way that I really forget that there's this entire group of people that need massive re-education on what wellness is, as compared to let me just write you a prescription. And that still unfortunately happens way too much. And I don't have time to have a conversation with you and figure out why you need this prescription in the first place. So where's the stress coming in, or what's your basic foundational health and wellness?
And then patients have the expectation where you just do this thing and it'll fix it. A very mechanistic view towards healing things.
Yes, exactly. And we have created that. We have created that culture of belief and if you come to me, I will fix you. Whereas people come to me and they get very disappointed when I say, I will teach you how to fix yourself. And they go, dang it, I just wanted the pill.
Yeah.
I'm looking to lose 20 pounds. Isn't there a pill you can write for me? And I'm like, yeah. And then you lose it and then you gain it back again. So might as well just lose it right in the first place. And it saves us all a lot of time and frustration.
Okay, so the pill is located 5 miles from here. Walk over there and get it, and then walk over here and I'll show you how to take that pill. And then walk back to your house. Yeah.
That's how I can use the acreage. Our pharmacy is on the other
pretty
side of the
sloped.
hill.
Yeah.
And
It's
you have
pretty
to walk a
sloped.
half hour to get your prescription.
That's fun. Yeah. I totally see humor as part of wellness as well.
Oh yeah.
I can't even imagine how to be really healthy and mentally well and physically well if you took everything seriously and didn't see the funny side to it. So
Yeah,
that's my
optimistic
way.
people live longer.
I believe it. Because they're waiting to see how well it'll turn out, or I don't know. So,
It's that mentality. It's that, you know, we'll fix that versus the, oh my gosh, everything's just, you know, we just might as well give up. ER mentality.
that's funny, because when I'm teaching wilderness survival and doing research about who are the people that survive emergencies, it's usually the person who's neither an optimist nor a pessimist, but a fairly unimaginative realist. Somebody that says, well, I have this skill and I got to do that thing and this is in front of me, so I'm going to use that thing to do that thing. I'm not going to worry about will it work, will it not work. This is, I'm going to get rescued in 5 minutes. This terrible thing could happen to me any second. I'm just like, I'm going to put peg A in hole A, and then I'm going to put peg B in hole B, and they come through. That's who lives.
Well, what you're saying is they did the research study in the wrong population of people. They took the general population and checked optimism in them instead of in the survival group.
Well, it gets to be a smaller sample because the other ones didn't make it, so we can't ask them any questions. Anyway, okay, yeah, that's fun. Yeah, so what should we stay tuned for? Do you think in the culture? How are things are changing, and I know they're changing. One thing that I see is that America's got 330 million people in it, and they're not all thinking the same thing. And they're not all at the same level of learning. And some of them are heading this way with their thinking, and some of them are heading that way with their thinking, and some of them are heading this way with their thinking. And they're all going full steam ahead on what they think. So if you have an idea and you think, oh, but the prevailing attitude is this, that, and the other thing, that doesn't matter. It's an idea. It'll roll. Talk to people about it. Talk it up. Make it work. Teach your kids about it. Find other people that are interested in it. It's interesting being in the information age these days. I'm old enough to remember when pretty hard to get an idea to spread fast.
Yeah, exactly.
You could spread an idea real fast today.
Now it's
so.
just all about your YouTube presence.
Wait, I have one of those. Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, so yeah, I'm glad that we talked about this, and as I do shows, I keep kind of referring back in my mind to concepts that I've played with in previous shows and guests that I've had on, and so I'm hoping that viewers have watched lots of them, because I hope they don't get lost when I say, oh yeah, and remember that time when we had Dr. Potter on and we were talking about you know, because that'll happen. So I want to thank you so much for joining me, and
My pleasure.
I like the fact that I don't have to do shows of a very specific length, because that means as soon as I figure out that I've run out of conversation, I can stop. That way the whole show can be really fun to listen to and exciting. So this has been Earth Skills with Jeff Gottlieb, and we'll be back again, and go outside.